What's up, guys, and welcome back to Moan Inc. If you guys are new here, then what's up? My name's Erica. Heya, how you doing? Now, today's video may seem like a bit of a curveball. I totally understand that. However, I would like to convince you that it's actually not. This conversation is such a long time coming. And today I'm speaking to an incredible artist who is more well known by her username, her pseudonym, which is Flaroh. However, her real name is Flora. Now, if you guys don't know who Flora is, you guys have never heard Flaroh before. Flora is an incredible artist who uses the ancient world as inspiration to create the most fun, pop arty, kind of cartoony, but not really all that cartoony, just digital pieces of art in order to educate and also have fun with the study of classics. So Flora, if I'm not mistaken, is most well known for her caryatids depiction, which is really the thing that sort of pushed her onto the scene a few years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, again, if I'm not mistaken. And not only that, but since then, she's been she's literally gone viral so many times for her alternative covers of the Iliad, Odyssey, and the Aeneid, as well as her map of Odysseus' journey home from Troy all the way to Ithaca, and so on and so forth. Flora has truly, truly done it all. And I think it's so important for me as the channel host to expose you guys to alternate ways of making money in classics, and also alternate ways of being successful in the classics world without just taking the traditional route of, study, become a teacher, or become an author, whether in fiction or non-fiction. Flora is living proof that you can actually take classics and run with it and be incredibly successful and incredibly well known for it. So I'm so excited to get into all of the adaptations, all of the nitty-gritty about your artwork, how you dive into everything. But the way that I like to start these chats, which is how we're going to start this one, the way that I like to start these chats is by asking my guests to explain to my audience their classics context. And since you are also an artist, we'll do a separate question for your art context. But classics-wise, how did you first discover classics? When did that happen? And how did it lead you into a more traditional academic route of, studying it and really living and breathing it, doing digs and all of that sort of stuff before we get into the art side?
I was quite lucky that my mum was really into classics. So my name is Flora, so that's already quite a classical name. So definitely I grew up with like the Odyssey and sort of like the children's versions, also some gory versions. But it wasn't until, so again, I was really lucky that my high school in America, they actually taught Latin. So I'm terrible with spoken languages. So I was like, I'll do Latin because it helps with the tests and I don't have to speak it. So I started doing it and then we were supposed to speak it. So, but yeah, so with this Latin class, I was like so into it. And we also had quite a lot of culture. So our teacher would be like telling us about the Romans, but also to learn about the Greeks and things. I was like, this is really interesting. Like all the other classes in high school, apart from art, I really wasn't that fussed about. But Latin, I was like always so excited for Latin class, which was super cool. So that's when it came like time to choosing a degree. I was like, well, actually, I could do art, but I already do that on the side anyway. But I would really like to learn more about the ancient world under like the tutelage of professors and things. So then I went and did my bachelor's in ancient studies at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, which is an amazing school, great ancient studies department. I focused in Roman history and archaeology, which was super fun. It was just amazing to get to do like deep research into this subject. So that's how I kind of got into it.
And so then your art background, until we can finally combine these two things, just so that everybody's like on the journey with us to discovering you, if this is like the first time they've ever encountered you in their work, which I can't imagine this would be the first time, but just in case. So your art background though, how did you start drawing? Or was it more so like doodling and then all of a sudden you realized you were good at art and then you ended up continuing it and the decision to not do it at university. How is your art personality side developed?
I think like again, it's that classic thing where it's like, well, I've always been drawing. I've definitely always enjoyed art, but especially around was it like sixth grade, when school started getting quite difficult, I was always like drawing under the table or like doodling. So it definitely started with a lot of that kind of developing the craft. And then sort of like with the boom of Tumblr and things, getting into like the fan art and sort of that's how I got into like social media and things. But I really didn't start drawing the ancient world until I was at university. I think I always say like my first main piece was, you've probably seen it, the Attic red figure sort of inventory piece on the green background. So I did that because I had a Greek archaeology exam coming up, and I was like, oh, I'll make myself a little like study sheet. That'll be quite fun. And that kind of blew up, and then I kept drawing more sort of ancient history things. And I found it like really fun because when I was drawing them, I was doing it as kind of research, I suppose. So the same way that like doing research is fun, but then I could, instead of displaying it in a paper, I was displaying it visually.
But it's funny that you say that it was for studying because so I'm not an artist like anymore. I did art at secondary school though. So I went to secondary school in the UK and I did it for GCSE and for A level. But how I used to study for my academic subjects was doing like a doodle and sticking it to things. So I did philosophy and I would like draw a sheep and I would stick it to like my cereal box. So every time I looked at my cereal box, I'd have to go over like herd mentality according to Nietzsche. And like that was how I used to study. So it's so interesting you did that with the pots. Obviously not on the same level, but meaning behind it.
No, actually, that's so funny because it is like even if I was like doodling on my notes, like that helps me as kind of having a visual milestone. So like I always that's a lie. So like usually, I think for subjects I was quite good at, I would like type the notes. But for subjects, because I did a minor in political science, because I wanted to challenge myself, and then it basically ended up being just like a history minor because I only chose the historical science classes. But still, I was like completely out of my depth. So I would like handwrite all my notes and then like draw little doodles next to them, and that would like help me remember where it was.
It's such a thing. And I tell people that all the time like, figure out how to study that works for you because everybody's so different. And so I love that we're on the same wavelength with that. Obviously, you're way more talented, but still.
No, like it's one of, I was saying sort of like, oh, I'm so glad I'm not in uni anymore, but I do miss it because it's such a skill and like something that I've honed. So I'm doing Italian lessons right now. Like they're very chill. But sort of my group partner was like, oh, I'm having like really hard time how like having to remember this vocabulary. And I was like, do you know Quizlet? Flashcards, or sort of I was like doing all of this, and they were a bit like, this is an adult after work class. They didn't say this because they're very lovely, but I could see in their eyes they were like, we're not going to be marked on this. And I was like, I need to rein this back.
Yeah, but Quizlet, yeah, I used that for Latin at university and it was so helpful.
Honestly, I paid for premium when I was doing my archaeology classes because I could put pictures. If you paid for premium, you could add pictures. So it would be like Corinthian column or sort of like peristyle, whatever.
That is brilliant. Oh, goodness. And so that moment of cohesion with classics then and art was that sort of study sheet that you made for yourself. And then you just kept going from there, or?
Yeah, so again, university is a bit hard. So usually during like exams and things, I was like doing like full drawings. I didn't really have the time or the energy. So it was usually during sort of breaks I would just draw for fun. Like I definitely like I put research. I was very, because if you post something onto Twitter and there's an anachronism, you will hear about it within the first 5 seconds. So literally I'd be drawing stuff and pretending that like my professors were looking over my shoulder, and I was like, this has to be right, or I have to like have the like backup for it. So that's also a large part of it, to go, actually, I have the research behind this.
Well, something I wanted to ask you about actually was because your pieces are so complex in so many different ways. Because I think, like, from the outside looking in, and I see this a lot with people who've never taken art, that they'll think the bigger, the more complex, and the smaller, the easier. Just size wise, that's kind of how people relate it. Like a story, which doesn't have anything to do with ancient art, but I one time went to the Louvre with my ex-boyfriend at the time, but we went and in the same room as the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa's on one side, and they've got these gorgeous, like, big paintings all along the walls. If you guys haven't been, it's a stunning room. And he literally was like, these are more impressive than the Mona Lisa because of the size. Like, he didn't understand that. And I remember standing there being like, I've got to explain this whole thing to you then, because honestly, nothing trumps this. And so with your work, you have these small pots, or you have these small details, or, you know, whatever it is, like background details. My favorites are, like, you know, your covers of the Odyssey and the Iliad and the Aeneid. They're so gorgeous. But for you, when you think back to your pieces, what's the most complex thing that you've done that's not necessarily the biggest or the smallest? Or what's something that you think of that you're like, that was such a labor and it totally paid off, but it was a lot of intricacy?
Let me think, because there's been like quite a few that are like really. Hmm. But I would say, like, off the top of my head, actually, if I move my Hadrian's Wall piece here, because that was like pure research and also was a lot of site visits. But that one, it took me about a week of work. I would say, yeah, like a week of working on it every day. And the first day and a half was just research. Had like Zotero out and I was like collecting all the what's it called? Sources. Um yeah, because that this like usually when I'm depicting myths and things, you can be quite sort of tweak it a bit or even like modernize it. But my Hadrian's Wall illustration is so like heavily archaeology based. And also it was I made it because last year was the 1900th anniversary of the building of the wall. So there was a bit of like a cultural festival going on the whole year. So I was like, oh, I'll make it and like tag it with that. But then I was like, well, this means that all of the local archaeologists are going to be seeing this. And if I just extraordinarily mess something up, it's going to be a bit embarrassing.
See, the one for me, like that I literally, the first time I saw this, I was like, what is going on? Like, in a good way, I was like, how in the world did Flora do this? But it was your map of the Odyssey. That, like, boggled my brain that you did that.
Yeah, that was also a bit insane. That one though, that was a commission. So a couple commissioned it for their living room, which that was super helpful too, because I just kind of went, great, what map or what route do you want me to show? So I didn't have to do a lot of the initial research because they went, oh, we want sort of like Circe's Island to be, I think it's Majorca in that map or Menorca. And so I was like, great, amazing. So the kind of, I don't have to do a lot of the research. But that was still quite a lot of work, obviously, like mapping it out and then drawing all the little details. And with commissions, I do like a lot of stages. So I send the sketch, they give me feedback. So also, like when I'm drawing something by myself, I can kind of go, I'm gonna do this, this, and this. So it was a lot of like back and forth, which meant that we got sort of the perfect image at the end.
Well, I was going to ask about commissions because, again, I don't do this, so I literally have no idea. But do commissions limit you as an artist, or do you find them more helpful because you have that back and forth and you can get exactly what someone wants? So it's not necessarily what you want, it's making the client happy. Or does that make it harder and does that put like way more pressure on the piece?
No, I guess I would say like with commissions versus like doing my own stuff, there's pros and cons to like each side. Because I at least like so when I'm doing things for like Patreon, that's completely of my own ideas, and that's cool because if I have an idea that I really want to draw, I can do it. But like with commissions, maybe someone they like love a very like when I first started out, I really didn't know that much about Knossos, and that's a really popular place. So I got a lot of commissions for that. And at first I was like, oh, I'm a Romanist, like, and also half of these frescoes are like a Victorian invention, so I have to do all this research to get it like the most authentic, because my art's all about authenticity. And so that was definitely it, like at first it was difficult, but it was also really good because now I'm like, ah, Knossos, of course, like I can illustrate that, and it's like really broadened my knowledge. And that's something that I do miss about university is here, like all my friends are doing, like there are a lot of like scientist friends, which is so cool, but I have no idea what they're talking about. And then I talk about ancient history and they go, that's really nice. So like through commissions and things, I'm like, I can really like over email or Zoom, like really nerd out with someone and they can tell me all about their specialist interest and why they want it illustrated. And I go, oh, I had no idea that sort of this was so interesting. And then I'm like, I learn about something new and I get to illustrate it. And yeah, so getting to do that as my job is pretty cool.
That's a really important aspect, I think a lot of people don't realize about being creative and doing freelance work as well. Because, like, obviously not in the same, like, dimension, but with YouTube, I get lots of requests to do things, and people will be like, oh, can you explain this? Or can you read through this book? I do a lot of, like, summaries. And there are some things that, like, I never had to read. And I'll be like, okay, I guess so. I guess I can go and read that whole thing and see what comes of it. It's happened a lot with I did like a whole women's series and people were being like, what about this one? What about this? And I'm like, oh, I guess I gotta go and dive into Latin or dive into some Greek. And I'm like, at the start of it quite nervous, and then by the end of it I'm like, wait, I'm so glad because I had never interacted with this thing or this person beforehand.
No, exactly. Like I'm trying to think. So even with Patreon, because one of the things I really like about that community aspect is sort of my community on Patreon. They're on there because they're really into ancient history and my artwork. So I get some really good suggestions because I do an illustration every month. So, and usually I'll post an illustration at that point. I've done like a massive personal illustration. I'm like, I'll never draw again. So I just go, if you guys like, what do you guys want to see? Is there anything you want illustrated? And then, yeah, people will be like, oh, this Hera of XYZ. And I was like, I've never heard of this. And then I went on like a Wikipedia deep dive and I was like, this is so cool. Oh my God. So it's the same kind of thing where yeah, people suggest stuff that I've never heard of before. And then like as I learn about it, I get inspired again for new things. It'll come to me later, but there was an illustration that I did that I would have never done, but because I kind of incidentally learned about it while researching someone else's suggestion. And so I feel like I still have that kind of university setting of constantly learning about stuff and it expanded my mind.
I was going to ask because your style is so specific. And again, this is positive. I don't want anyone to take my tone as like, oh, it's so specific. Like, that's a really, really good thing. Because when I'm scrolling through Twitter, I follow quite a few artists on Twitter. And yet I always know when yours pop up because it's so distinctly your style. So, where did that style come from, though? Did that come from when you moved your art to digital art, that then that's the style that came out? Or do you look at other, maybe more modern artists or modern art movements, and you're like, oh, that's the shit, and that's what I'm using for this piece or for this whole, series that you're doing?
Yeah, so I've definitely gone through several different styles. Because I started doing digital art way back in like 2009. So I think I started where I would like draw it on paper and then I would scan it and then digitally color it. Yeah, so I definitely take a lot of inspiration from the ancient world. Like I do like to go to museums and do studies of statues, but most of my inspiration, obviously, from my modern art style is from other modern artists. So I have a list of ones that I sort of people's artwork that I really like to go and look at and just kind of go, ooh, I like this part. Oh, this kind of inspires me. So I don't know if you know Samantha Mash.
No.
Her stuff is really good, really inspiring. Same kind of color block style. This is the thing is I don't if people ask me what my style is and I don't really know how to describe it. But also, so growing up as a young artist on Tumblr, I was really into Claire Hummel stuff as well. Her username is Shumla. She did. I don't know if you ever saw the historically accurate Disney princesses,
I did.
like way back,
Right. Okay.
or their use of like line and things. That is because I really in my artwork, I try to make all the lines connecting. It's quite a little thing, but I usually never have a line just end, especially on clothes. I'm not kind of like there's always going to be a bit of like a curve, and that's what they always did with their artwork, where I was like, that looks really clean. And then during the pandemic, I really got into her name is Katie Smith. I think she's based in Glasgow, but she does really bright, colorful illustrations. And so that, because I'm always trying to make my illustrations really bright and colorful to kind of bring color back into the ancient world. So I also like to look at her stuff for inspiration on the palette. But yeah, so I'd say right now these are probably my top three inspirations. But again, like I see all this beautiful artwork on Instagram and Twitter and things and think, oh, that's really cool. Or I really like the way that they draw plants. So I'm going to try and incorporate that kind of, you know what I mean?
That's so funny because so obviously my content is all ancient history based, but I watch so much YouTube to like get editing ideas and all of this. So I like pick and choose things from like vloggers, like people that you would never expect. Like even so I have like an outro that's just a photo of me that changes between like two different poses. And I stole that from a vlogger because that's her outro. And I just thought, oh my God, that's so clever. That's so simple. Like, and then you've got this little promotional video next to it and it's just her. I was like, genius. And so I took that and I did it like my own way. So I always like to see where people are finding their little bits of inspiration because I'm like, what do you do? And do we do similar things or is this just me stealing things from everybody else?
I know it's such like a balance because it's even like when I was developing my style where I was like, oh, is this like breaching full on into copying or am I actually like putting my own twist onto it? So now I'm quite confident. I see my work and I'm like, okay, this is definitely standalone my stuff. Um, but yeah, like you have to be so careful because if you like if someone looks at your artwork and like doesn't immediately think, oh, that's definitely Flora's artwork, it's a bit like, oh, because you also like same for you from a branding standpoint, you do want to be standalone. But that like but also that's how you develop your own style and brand is by picking and choosing, but making it your own.
Absolutely. And you said that thing about color blocking. So, my favorite thing about your art is the color that you use. Because to me, it's always surprising. Like when you had like your Iliad cover, so the Iliad is my favorite of those big three epics. And you had like the whole red, like red color grade, right? It's not obviously all the same color, but the red color grade, and then this like bright teal for like the details and like the shield and all of this that I was like, whoa, I would have never chosen that color. And even then, so my phone background, which I'm, well, background and also the phone case, I'm using it to film though, so I can't hold it up. But I have your Lionsgate one. So on that, you have like that really bright orange, those red details. And then the sky is like, you would assume that would be the pop of color, but you've used a more muted blue for that so that the rock really is the thing that's really bright. So is the inspiration for the color specifically coming from other artists that you saw them do it and you went, well, why can't I do that? Or is it a case of you also just kind of sitting there and going, well, what if I just do this? Let's see if that works.
I think it's a mix again. So with the Iliad, that's actually when I first learned how to use gradient maps. So this is a little trick. So basically what it does is it you make a gradient. So for the Iliad, on one side it's really dark red, and then the light side it's that bright teal. And it so the image that I did, it was like grayscale or something. So but it automatically makes all the bright whites that bright teal and then all the darker shades that red. So it meant that I could really like play around with different color combinations and see what worked and what didn't. So that's I didn't start out just going, it's going to be red and teal.
That's so interesting.
And this is why I love digital art because I can be like, I'll worry about the colors later. Right now, I just need to get like the values down.
Have you ever gotten a commission? I mean, I have no doubt that you have, but Was there ever a commission or maybe just a moment in your art career thus far that was like such a pinch me moment? I actually have one now that I'm asking this for you that I was like, wow, Flora's made it. But do you have one that you were like, oh my God, this person knows who I am, or this person retweeted my art, or this person bought a random print and posted it? Like any of those?
So this is so annoying because I'm actually working on a dream commission right now, but it's NDA.
Oh,
Very annoying, but hopefully I think we'll be finished it by the summer and then I can brag all about it. I remember this like ages ago. Did you ever see the program When Rome Ruled
yes.
with Dr. Darius Arya? This was years ago, but I think he retweeted one of my artworks. I think I was still in university and I was like, oh my God. I texted my mother and I was like, that man from the television from that show you like to watch retweeted my artwork. And she was like, oh, you've made it. Oh, do you know what? And then this is not classics related, but for Inktober, I did a drawing of Vladislav from What We Do in the Shadows. I think that's his name. He was played by Jermaine Clement. And then Jermaine Clement retweeted that piece as well. And I was like, oh my God, I'm a celebrity.
You know what though? The moment for me when I saw this on Twitter, again, I was like, stop it. So Kelly and I, who I know you follow as well, we had both just read Law by Alexandra Bracken. So we read the book and then we did a review of that. And then right after that, you were like, yeah, so I got commissioned to do the cover of Law. And I was like, what?
Yeah, no, that was insane as well. Especially because when she contacted me, the my local Waterstones, like they had the massive lore display and everything, and I was like, you wrote this and you want me to illustrate it?
Well, something I was wondering as well from an artist point of view is because your art comes in so many different formats. You've got, you know, like the posters, you've then got phone cases, you then do also the backgrounds as well that you can get for your phone. Like you have every different sort of format that people can download, buy, stickers, you know, whatever it is. So from your perspective, what is the format that best fits your art, do you think? Like what is it that you see and you're like, oh, this is where the art shines. The other stuff is okay, but this is my favorite.
So I'm gonna say in general, art prints are probably the best, but ignoring art prints, probably like, you know, like tapestries or any kind of so like on Redbubble, sort of pillows, tapestries, even blankets, like any way that it's printed onto a fabric, something about the way the colors really like enrich onto it and it has that matte finish. Like I don't like a glossy finish to my artwork. I like a matte thing where all the colors are kind of in your face. But then I'm saying that, but also, so like, do you know the difference between RGB and CMYK?
Okay, so I'm not gonna lie. There's another artist, you know Anna, who does Asta and Celine?
Yes.
So she explained this whole thing to me, and I just like nodded at her, and I didn't retain anything. So it has been explained. So I know those terms. Do I know what they are? No. So do continue.
Basically, so like again, I'm self-taught, so I had to learn this. But so RGB, that's the computers you see on a screen. So with that, you can do some truly eye-watering, like you know, blue light from screens. You can get such like a bright blue on screens that you physically cannot replicate in like the physical world. I don't know the science behind it. It's something to do with light. So some illustrations, when I'm posting them online, if they have a vivid blue, like my Temple of Poseidon, that's very blue heavy. So on screens that looks beautiful. And on print, it still looks great, but when I send it for printed stuff, I have to change it and mute the blue because you physically cannot replicate that same blue. So even though it still looks in printed form, it looks best on like printed onto fabric or art prints. It's still like it looks a bit different on screens.
Right.
But I would say most of the stuff that I sell is physical though. So I make a point that I never sell digital files of my artwork. Just because piracy is quite bad with art. And it adds that exclusivity. So if you are on my Patreon, then I do offer sort of like digital downloads and things. But in the like my public shop and stuff, I only ever offer like physical merch.
And do you have, okay, you totally don't have to answer this, but I'm really nosy. Do you have any pieces throughout your entire like art career that at the time you were like, this is baller, this is amazing, you put it up, people love it, but now you look back on and you're like, oh, I'm cringing inside because I could do that so much better now, but I just don't have the time to redo it, so this is it. And you'll like never like really tell people when they buy it, being like, this is not my least favorite, but the most cringeworthy one.
The rats are gonna hate this, but my carroted piece,
Really?
I don't hate it, but I did it in like 3 hours or something. There's not a lot of detail in it. Like it is one of those things where I'm like, I need to redo this. But it infuriates me that I'll post something that I've put blood and sweat into, spent days on, and people are like, that's really nice. And then, like I did 2 days ago, I'll do like a little throwback, like, oh, throwback to my carrion piece. Everyone's like, yes, 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 love it, more. And I'm like, okay. Like I look at it and I was like, I like it. Like I'm proud of it still. But I like with the clouds and everything, like it's this month it turns 4 years old. And for me, I'm like, this is very 4 years old. Like my style has changed very much. But then I'm scared that I'm like, when I finally do redraw it, people are gonna go, I like the old one better. So I'm like, maybe I'll just rest on my laurels.
So actually, I had a question, not about criticism, because that's not the right way of wording it, but basically, for all the newbies on the channel as well, you will not know this. But this is a little fun fact about me. So I used to do makeup looks on Instagram and I would post them on Twitter. And I stopped doing that. I literally did them for maybe like 8 months, like during lockdown. So I had nothing else to do. I worked at a pub, so I literally had nothing else to do. And I would do these like huge makeup looks. It took me like 8 hours to do or something. I did like a whole wave for Poseidon and all of this. And after a while, I found the more attention it was getting, that's when I stopped. Because the more attention it was getting, people would comment and they wouldn't criticize. They would just say, oh, that's not how I would do it. And I was like, okay, that's fine. But again, this is me putting eyeshadow on or like painting my face or whatever. So an example is I did Athena, and the choice I made was to rip up paper, stick it to my face, and make them like blood wounds, and then to put like silver eyeshadow on to get like Warcraft and Wisdom in one look on my face, which is not an easy thing to do. And literally all the comments, it took me hours to do that, and all the comments were, well, where's the owl? And I was like, are you serious? Are you serious? So I have no doubt that you probably get comments like that aren't criticisms, but are just like, well, what about this? And like, where's this? How do you handle those comments? Do you just brush them off or?
I think again, like I'm very lucky that I don't get too much, or if so I think there's like two different types. So I'll start with like the ridiculous ones is you'll get a lot of like white nationalists or those we can go into this, like those types being like, why did you draw a black person in ancient Rome? This is woke sort of like white racism. I'm like, the Roman Empire was really big and surprise went into Africa. So and usually I mean if they're like horrific, obviously I delete them. But if they're not great, but also like not using slurs or anything, I like use that to be like, hey, this is not cool, and also XYZ. So use that as more of like, so other people in the comments can read it, because maybe some people are also like, I thought that Rome was in the European thing, and then they can read it and go, oh, I didn't know that. I hope so, at least. So you get those where I'm just like, oh my God. But also like I do get a few where, I mean, at first I'm like, and then I reread them and I'm like, well, actually they're kind of right. Like I did what's it called? Like a poster of all the gods. And for Vesta, I didn't draw her with a veil. It just completely, I just forgot that she is the veiled goddess. And I got a lot of comments where people were like, again, like maybe it's nicer to be like, hey, I felt like she should have a veil. I did get a few that were like, why doesn't she have a veil? Where I was like, okay, let's calm down. You're right. Like, I will admit you're right. Be nice. I think I try to, you do get like, yeah, you get a lot of comments where maybe people word it in a very direct way where I have to be like, they're just trying to inform, and this is not meant with malice. Because even one of my most recent Samian Ware inventory pieces, I posted onto Facebook. And those ones, because they involve dates, I always get so stressed because I'm like, I'm gonna mess this up. And I thought I did it, like I did a lot of research and I was like, I got the exact dates and I was like, this is great, perfect. I posted onto Facebook and then someone who actually digs in Roman Britain, they were like, this isn't right. And I was like, oh my God. So I responded, at first I was like, should I just ignore it? And I was like, well, if it's wrong, then I shouldn't be like selling prints of something that has the incorrect dates. So I responded to them and I was like, here's all the sources I used. If you can like point me in the right direction or recommend the right date, like time frame, I'd really appreciate that. And then they were like, yeah, blah blah blah. It was an older man, so I think it was his keyboard style that was coming off as but yeah, so this is a very long-winded way of, in short, being like, I try to use them as learning experiences and how to improve my own art. But also, like, sometimes you just get some really ridiculous comments where I just go, oh my God, okay.
So we're going to start winding this down now, Flora. So I've got like two more questions for you. But the first of which is we've been talking a lot about dating things and, you know, the Hadrian's Wall depiction behind you and trying to be accurate. Do you feel a sense of like pressure and responsibility when creating these works for the public that you have to be accurate and making sure that classics is, you know, educated correctly online? Do you feel that pressure as an artist?
I mean, I definitely do. I've had lots of teachers reach out and say that they sort of have my artworks up in their classrooms and stuff. So yeah, knowing that my art is being used for educational purposes too, that adds to, again, not wanting to get called out on Twitter for my anachronism, but also being like, it's quite like reassuring to be like anything that you can, any like of my art prints that you can get, they are going to be meticulously researched. Because yeah, I mean, sort of fake news and all of that. I mean, we've all seen it like with the Atlantis stuff, where people will just be saying anything online about ancient myths and ancient history, and people are going, well, of course this is true. I read it on the internet. So yeah, especially like doing daily life scenes, like illustrating the ancient world, I'm always hyper aware that I'm like, this needs to be completely, at least like plausible. So especially doing scenes in of like set in ancient Rome or anything like those daily life scenes, I always try to make it very apparent that this is an imperial civilization. So you've like lots of people from different areas of the Roman Empire, stuff like that. Or even depicting like with my inventory pieces. I'm like, well, these make great educate like classroom posters, so it would be really irresponsible of me to like have something that isn't plausible. I think even with like myths, when I depict myths, I still, again, you can be a bit like loosey goosey with it. Like I love Disney's Hercules because I'm like, this is a modern myth. Like you are just reinterpreting it. But I still try to keep a lot of like relevance in it. Like I was saying with my Hecate illustration, or if you say Hecate, I don't know. All of that's based on how the Romans depicted her, but I also gave her a bird because a lot of modern worship of her, I've noticed there's a lot more like ravens and crows involved. So I'm like, oh, this is kind of like a nice modern addition that still honors the being of Hecate in like a academic way, if that makes sense. But yeah, so I try to keep everything as accurate as possible.
So then, as my final question, not really related to that at all, but it's just the way that I always end these interviews with everybody. And it's just because a lot of my viewers won't have access to people like you without these videos. So I always think it's important to end on a piece of advice. And because you're an artist and you've done classics, you can sort of pick and choose whether you want to give an art piece of advice, a freelance piece of advice, or a classics piece of advice. But for people who are getting into any of those realms, if you could give them one little tidbit to remember, one little bit of advice, what would you tell them?
With art, there's always the thing of like always be drawing, like even if it's doodles, just to keep it up. Because I didn't go into full freelance artistry until, so I fully went into it 2020, because again, with your makeup, I was waitressing during the pandemic and that was it. So I was like, okay, I'll do art on the side. But I properly started like my posting onto online my art and like fan art and stuff in 2009. So it's been like a whole 10 or 11 years of like build up. So just, I guess, accept that it might take time, but also that dedication, you'll get there. There's tons of little grants that you would never think of, but if you find them, like they'll cover really niche things. So like doing an archaeology dig, got that covered. I went to Turkey on a education, like we went around all the ancient sites. Found out about that through my university. They had like a very specific grant for that. Like they would cover the first 3 students to do that. So I mean, it definitely depends if you're institutionally tied. I know that is probably easier when you're at university. But basically, don't be afraid to apply for that money because there's still tons of stuff that's out there.
And on that perfect advice, we're now going to wrap this up. So thank you guys, obviously thank you Flora, but thank you guys for watching the video, for supporting me and for supporting Flora. You guys can find all of her links in the description below. So anything that you could possibly need, her social medias, her commissions links, her Patreon links, you guys can find all of those down there. So definitely go and support Flora since you've already done your job in supporting me by watching this video. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to Flora again. I hugely, hugely appreciate you taking time out of your morning because you guys were literally filming this at 9:30 in the morning. So I appreciate that so much more than I can say on camera. And with that, we will see you guys next time with more videos here on Mode Inc. So we'll see you guys then.